Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. Stop. Pastor time. Well, hey everyone. Welcome to Anything Goes, a journey home, a place to find hope, encouragement, inspiration, and motivation to do the same on your journeys wherever they may take you. I am your host, Andrew Geist. And no, I don't own the rights to that song. I'm just being funny. But seriously, worship leaders, today is something different. We're going to be talking about pastors. Now, as worship pastors, I've worked with a lot of senior pastors, pastors in general, and they come in many different shapes and sizes. And the truth is that just as much as worship leaders must, pastors must do things as well. And for those of you who are pastors out there who might follow my podcast or might listen to my podcast, I thought you might appreciate a candid opinion about your position and just share with you some thought-provoking ideas that have come across my heart and my mind when working with pastors, and also how they impact me as a worship pastor and how they relate to me as a worship pastor. Now, for those of you who don't know, I've been a worship pastor for 15 years. I've served from small churches in Southern California in Boynton Park to middle churches of about 600 to 800 people on a Sunday in Fresno, California, to now 1,000 people on a Sunday morning at a church here in Katy, Texas. So I know what I'm talking about, and I have a lot to share with you pastors out there who could just use some encouragement on things that they could be doing better, or to kind of help them understand and facilitate future conversations with their worship pastors. So let's get into it. So today's episode is going to be a little bit longer, and I apologize for background noises because I have recently switched spaces in my work, and so I'm near outside walls, and there's a lot of things going on around me. So if there are any background noises, I deeply apologize, but it is what it is. I'm just happy to be here, and I hope you are too. So the first thing I want to talk about with pastors is twofold, and today's episode is going to probably be a little bit longer because where I would normally do one subject per each object of my topics, I'm actually going to wind up doing 6. So hang in there with me because this should be a good one. So first, pastors must equip their teams. What do I mean? From giving them a decent salary to helping them with medical benefits to providing decent resources for them to work with, i.e. just a computer to be able to access things like Planning Center and things like that, internet, you name it. All of the things that would go into running essentially what some might call a business, which I know in the church world and for pastors is kind of a 4-letter word and deeply offensive to some. But speaking as someone who's in their middle age at this point, it hurts me to say that. But the reality is that in order to do church well and with excellence, you need tools. Your worship pastor might need a band. You might need to be able to field the band. Maybe you need to pay them. Maybe you need to help him recruit because you've invited him or called him to your church and he's not from the area. So you actually need to help facilitate connections for him. Help him establish connections. Give him those first few foots in the door, if you will, with people who know people. In the music industry, and frankly in the commercial world in general, it is absolutely true that it is not about who you know, it's about what you know. Just kidding. It's really about who you know. 100% about who you know. Now, what you know matters. And if you show up to a job and you don't know squat, then yeah, probably going to get fired. Probably not going to have that job anymore. But having a church job is distinctly different from working in a commercial industry. And trust me, I have tried to work in the commercial industry and I have not liked any bit of it, nor wanted any part of it once I learned what it would take to be successful in that field. And I'm so grateful to God that He brought me and called me back to my first love and called me back to my first love in Him and Jesus and serving people. So the reality is that you need to equip your team. Does that mean that you as the pastor is probably going to have to sacrifice future visions for the success of your team by equipping them or equipping your worship pastor? Absolutely. It's not fun having to pay for a good professional band or having to pay for a good professional executive pastor. All of those things add up in the grand scheme of the overall budget. And speaking as a staff person, we get it. It's not an easy decision, nor do we envy you that position. It's why you were called to be the pastor. And I'm not telling you how to do your job, and I'm not telling you how to prioritize, but I promise you that ministry is about the people you serve, not how much money you bring in. Because in reality, God is going to bless how you work with the people that are coming into your church. And from that, the money will be there because God will provide it. Have faith, just like the rest of your staff is having faith in you to do the right thing and equip them. Now, one of the things a pastor needs to stop doing, and this one's going to sting a little bit. Pastors need to stop assuming things about their team. I've met a lot of senior pastors in my life, and some senior pastors have made assumptions that because I'm a musician, that I have spiritual maturity. Now, those aren't always true. And don't get me wrong, speaking from experience, I am a bit of a diamond in the rough. I have a master's degree in music, and I love Jesus with all my heart. You don't come across a lot of those in the world today. So I get it. It's hard to find that person. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. Stop assuming things about your team. Stop assuming that they might know what it is you're talking about when it comes to church culture. If you're not actually casting vision for your team and explaining to them on a regular basis what it is you expect from them, then at the end of the day, you're assuming things about them that they probably aren't doing or they probably don't possess. I've met a lot of senior pastors who assumed certain spiritual giftings about me. I had a senior pastor who thought that because I led worship and because I was a part of a charismatic culture that I spoke in tongues. I've never spoken in tongues in my life, and I don't believe that God's gifted me with that. Does that make me less of a Christian? Maybe in certain circles it might, but the reality is I don't think it does. But regardless, that's a dangerous assumption to make. And especially if I'm going to be a worship leader in a charismatic culture where speaking in tongues is a part of your church's culture, I might not be the most gifted person to do that thing. The same can be said for someone assuming that I know all of the language of a church. Now, here's the reality. The first church I ever worked at had a language about it that I didn't get for a whole year. And I realized that the more intentional that I was as a worship pastor in having conversations with my senior pastor about language like that and how I was saying things and why I was saying things and what I was saying, or even how I might go about saying those things to sound like us, a church, our church, I started to realize that that time span could shorten. But what I'm encouraging you as pastors to think about is be proactive in those communications. Now, look, you are just one man, just one person to oversee all of this. Do I expect you to have these conversations daily or every second of the day? No. And frankly, your staff around you, you paid them to do a job and you're paying them to do a job. And so there should be a equal part relationship there where each can come to the table and ask those questions without fear of judgment or condemnation. And let's face it, as Christians, we should not be condemning each other in any way, shape, or form because we are free by the blood of Jesus Christ. Am I right? The next thing that pastors must do is they need to start believing and trusting and then correcting. Now, what do I mean? I've worked in a culture where correction came before anything else. Now, correction isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. We all need accountability, don't get me wrong. But correction without explanation is nothing but direction. What I'm encouraging you as pastors to do is to evaluate your process. First off, come into the conversation with that staff member who's maybe made a mistake or let you down or failed, and believe in your heart that they did not do so with malice or evil thoughts in mind. Now, don't get me wrong. I've also been a part of church cultures where there was true evil going on behind the scenes. And it's not pretty. And it's not something you want to hear about in church culture at all. And I certainly don't crave it in my church culture here now. But the reality is, folks, worship pastors, your church is full of people who are broken and sinful by nature. So it's going to be a little messy. And yeah, there are going to be certain things that you might do as a senior pastor, or your worship team might do, or your staff might do that are worldly. And those are things that, frankly, we all have to be a part of correcting and making better. And one of the ways that we can do that is to believe and trust in each other that we do have each other's good at heart. Not that we're perfect, and not that we aren't going to fail, because we probably will. We're human and we're sinful by nature. But that we would believe and trust in our hearts that we are looking out for each other and trying to have the best interest for the church, our church that we're serving in as a whole. And then the other thing that worship or pastors must stop doing is they must stop under communicating. Every church that I've ever been a part of in my 15 years of experience has always struggled with a communication issue. Whether it starts from a place of a senior pastor believing that he's had a conversation that he's never had, being the kind of personality, perhaps even narcissistic or just generally unhealthy, and having unhealthy communication habits in the beginning, what you as a senior pastor may not realize is that over time, that kind of poor communication, unhealthy communication, dangerous communication, or lack thereof will be perpetuated by your staff culture. It will be repeated and rinsed and repeated and rinsed and repeated. If you're the kind of pastor who gaslights, or if you're the kind of pastor who likes to control the narrative, if you're the kind of pastor who has a conversation but then doesn't follow up, all of these patterns of behavior will be practiced by your staff because they see you do it. Stop under communicating. Stop communicating poorly. Now, don't get me wrong. I'll say this many times in this episode. Senior pastors, you are human. Us staff members, we get it. We don't expect you to be perfect. But if we come asking for more information and asking for communication, it means something is missing. It means that something's not right. And as the pastor, all we're asking you to do is just take a look at it and ask yourself and evaluate whether or not that's true. And then let's move forward together. The third thing that worship pastors, I just keep messing that up. Pastors must start doing is they must start thinking, then acting, and then reflecting on the feelings that they have from what they've done. We live in a society, we live in a world that likes to act after they've felt something. Now, let me put this out there for you. How many of you can picture a person that you've been counseling or a person that you've been giving advice to, and as you've been giving them advice, they immediately say, well, I feel angry, and then they go out and do the one thing that you told them not to do? To be perfectly honest, I'm a dad of 2 kids. That happens to me way more often than I realize, and it drives me nuts. I don't know about you pastors out there, but I'm sure nothing drives you more crazy than when you tell your worship pastor, please don't do blank. And they say, well, I feel pretty sad every time you tell me I can't do this thing. And so every once in a while, they wind up doing that thing, resulting in you perhaps being embarrassed, you perhaps being upset, you perhaps being frustrated, and probably looking for a new worship pastor, if you're being honest, if it's a pattern of behavior. But again, I go back to pastors are the bar. You set the example for all of us. And so if you want your culture as a church to be defined by thinking about what you want to do and then acting on it, and that's thinking of a plan, thinking of what it is that needs to be done, talking through the details, and then enacting that plan. then you have to be the purveyor of that kind of behavior. How can you do that? Well, one of the biggest things that I see a lot of senior pastors do is having an emotional response to something that they don't like, whether that's something in the congregation, something in the worship. For me personally, it's almost always in the worship. And what a worship pastor oftentimes will experience from their senior pastor is, I didn't like this song. Can we please do another one? Or can we please take that off the list? And as a worship pastor, my job 100% of the time is to submit to you as the pastor's authority. 100% of the time. No questions. However, as a worship pastor, oftentimes I get asked to not do songs. And I think to myself, I wonder why that is that way. I'm going to go have a conversation with my senior pastor. And I've walked into many a pastor's door to have that conversation, and that's gone a lot of different ways. One has gone, I don't like the song, just get rid of it, and no explanation. That's a hard one to swallow, especially for someone as a worship pastor who loves what they do, has deep convictions about song selection, deep convictions about theology and the words that we sing, has deep convictions about how to empower your musicians and how to build up strong, capable volunteer teams. All of those things are dramatically impacted when a song is just axed and there isn't a lot of explanation. And there's no worse position for a worship pastor to be in. That day when a volunteer comes and says, "Hey, why did we get rid of that song?" And your only answer is, "Well, it just doesn't fit us." That doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So don't put your team in that kind of position. Don't be afraid to just explain, "Hey, I really don't like the song. I don't feel like it is our culture here. It doesn't fit our culture." And that's a perfectly good response. And if your worship pastor, aka me, comes to you and talks to you and says, "Well, I think that this song has a lot of words that theologically reinforce these values that are important to us as a church," my encouragement to you is, be honest. If that answer does not satisfy you, and it really does boil down to, "I just don't like the song," then be honest. Tell them that you don't like the song. That's okay. We all get to have our own personal preferences. Guess what? As a worship pastor, I have a whole host of preferences about songs that sometimes I just set them aside because it's not about me as a servant to the church that I'm at. As a servant to the church that I'm at, I will set aside my preferences every day of the week to the senior pastor and elders and to the congregation, because it's not about my preference. It's about God, and it's about serving the people that God has called me to. So my preferences have no place in it, because guess what? If I'm focusing on my preferences, then I'm just being selfish as a worship pastor. And the same challenge goes out to you as senior pastors. If your motivation is based out of your own personal preferences, that's okay. But be honest about it. And then have the conversation with your worship pastor of, "I really don't prefer this. But if you really feel that our culture is really gravitating towards this song, then can you help me find a version that I would really like?" Because I promise you, your worship pastor would be more than happy to find a version that you like, especially if you show them grace and a willingness to have the conversation and keep it going, and at least entertain the idea of keeping a song or not keeping a song. Mind you, that's just one example of what I'm talking about. But that goes in hand to what I would encourage pastors to stop doing, which is stop reacting and be proactive. Stop being reactive, be proactive. What do I mean? As the senior pastor, you've got a lot on your plate. Your congregation is coming to you constantly, seeking your wisdom, seeking your advice, asking you deep theological questions, opening the door to such fantastic opportunities for conversation. And then you have your staff, who's also coming to you with questions, seeking your wisdom. Whew, that is a lot. And as a worship pastor, to you as senior pastor, I admire and respect you so much for doing that. It takes a special kind of person to elevate themselves and honestly humble themselves to such a point to make themselves so accessible to not just staff, but congregation, and being a part of their lives in such deep and profound ways is incredible. You are amazing. And frankly, a lot of people in the world take for granted their pastors, especially here in America. So, from the bottom of my heart as a worship pastor, thank you for what you do. Having said that, what I want to encourage you with is it's very easy for us as leaders to react to something that we don't like, kind of like the song that you didn't like. Or maybe it was something that was said by a pastor that you had doing announcements. Or maybe you didn't like something that an elder said at a meeting, or you didn't like something that this congregation member, or you heard something about somebody. Well, let's avoid that because that's borderline gossip. But you get what I'm talking about. There's a lot of things that you as a senior pastor like want to react to, want to call out, want to just drive home the point. Like, no, that's not how you follow Jesus. Do this. That's not what the Word of God does. It says this. I get it. I get it. Trust me, in my own little microcosm with worship, I have the same reactions that you do about all of those things. But a better thing to do as a leader and as a pastor to your staff is rather than react to every single thing that's happening, trust your people that you've put in place to do their jobs, but then also be proactive. Now, I'm not talking about being a micromanager. I'm not talking about looking over everybody's shoulder at every single instance, at every single moment. What I'm talking about is be proactive. It's a part of the communicating that we just talked about. Have those conversations with your pastors, with your worship team, with your staff members who are helping you. Have those conversations. Look, I get it. It's not easy. You're one person and you only have so much time. But that also leaves me with this last point. Be patient. Our lives are finite here. And you as a senior pastor know this better than most. If you're wanting to steer the ship of your church in any particular direction, you're going to have resistances and you're going to have difficulties. And oftentimes, even if it's a 100-person church, turning that ship and changing the culture can be tedious and difficult and long and challenging. But you have to be willing to go on the ride. And honestly, if your staff is still with you after all that you've given them in regards to vision, then that tells you they're along for the ride too. They're not actually opposed to you. They're not actually against you. They're actually for you. And so my encouragement to you is stop all those things that I talked about. Stop assuming things about your staff. Stop under communicating. Stop reacting and be proactive. And then start equipping, start believing and trusting, and then correcting your team. And then start thinking about things and being willing to embrace the time that it takes to think about those things, because that oftentimes includes other people. Then act, then reflect, and experience the feelings that you had after all of that. So I love you, senior pastors. And like I said, stop. Pastor time. I love you guys. We'll talk to you later. So this would normally be the part of the episode where I ask the question, I want you to do something. But here's the thing. What I want you to do is, if you're a worship pastor, leave a comment below in the notes or wherever you're listening to this. Message me on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook and let me know if anything that I've shared is relevant to you as a pastor. Or if you're a worship pastor and you're like, yeah, I really wish my senior pastor would do this. Share them this episode. I would love for them to watch this and hear from somebody who's honestly not biased, because I'm not there at your staff culture. Pastors, how did this resonate with you? I would love to know. Please leave a comment. Tell me if I'm way off base. Tell me if I'm totally out of bounds by saying these things out loud. I completely understand. But my hope is that a pastor would be encouraged and be invited into the process of what a staff person experiences on a weekly basis and what they might wish from their senior pastor in general. And to hear it from somebody who honestly probably doesn't have a horse in the race, that might be encouraging or of value to you as a senior pastor. So what I want you to do, leave a comment below. Let me know how this impacted you, because I'd like to know. Thanks for listening to the podcast today, for liking and sharing. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so that you can get the notification every time I take a journey. If you'd like to support this podcast, there's a link below and in the show notes. You can find all previous seasons and episodes for this season at ajourneyhome.blog and connect with me at aguysproduction.com or through Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can connect with me in the social belows and in the show notes. Now let's be kind to each other, show faith, love, and hope to those who need it. Y'all have a great week. I'm going home.